Okay, hello chaps. This is a video looking at the production possibility frontier, and hopefully you're going to watch this over the summer to prepare you fully for starting the A-level economics study upon our return to school in September. So, first we need to do is define what is meant by the production possibility frontier, also known as a PPF. And PPFs, therefore, are curves that show the maximum potential output level of one good for a given level of production of another good for the current state of technology within an economy. So given what we know in an economy, what is the most we can make of one good given what we're already making of something else? Here are two examples. On the top one we have quite a generic PPF where we have capital goods on one axis and consumer goods on another axis. The reason we use these two axes as a generic case is because in theory any good made is either going to be used as capital or as a consumer good. So in theory we can account for almost the whole production made in our economy in this simple PPF. We then below have a more specific PPF where it's perhaps looking at cars and trucks. And in this case the PPF is a straight line, and we'll look into what that means during this short video. So as I said, the two goods on either axis could be any two goods which compete for resources. When all resources are being used, you have to take some resources away from making one good in order to produce more of another. If we're making lots of consumer goods, in order to make more capital goods, we're going to have to take some of those workers away, some of those natural resources, some of that capital away, and put them towards making capital goods in order to increase production. The role of the PPF then is that it allows us to show all the combinations of goods that can be produced if an economy's factors of production are fully employed and use their maximum efficiencies. So we could have this combination here where we have quite a high number of capital goods, quite a low number of consumer goods, or we could have this bundle here, more consumer goods than the previous one but slightly less capital goods, and we could have any combination indeed on this curve. We spoke about this already, but the general case, when we consider the whole economy, we can split all production into two types in order to show it on a PPF. Consumption goods, those are goods and services used by people to satisfy their needs and wants. And capital goods, those are goods and services, G&S, used in the production of other goods. And PPFs often have a concave shape, but they can, as I've said before, also be straight, which we'll look at in a bit. We now have to understand what the different points on a PPF mean. So here's an example PPF where we're considering two goods. We're considering fishing and farming as our two outputs. So point A, in this case, shows an economy where fishing is the only output. So point A would be here. We're only making fishing. 100 units of fish are made for 0 units of farming. Point B shows an economy where farming is the only output. So point B, we're only making farming, make 100 units of farming output, but we therefore have 0 units of fish made. All our resources are being used in farming. Point C shows an economy where 90 units of fishing are made and 50 units of farming are produced. That's this point here, point C. And point D, 50 units of fishing and 90 units of farming. Point D is here. Point E is going to be an inefficient point. Point E could exist here where we're making 50 units of fishing and 50 units of farming. More of both fishing and farming can be produced without cutting down on the other. By employing some unemployed resources, we could go to point C, which would be an increase in fish without cutting down the amount of farming being made. We could go to point D, which is an increase in farming without cutting down any of the fishing output, or we could go anywhere in between C and D. Those points there are all possible without cutting, we can make them still, but without cutting down the production we already have at point E. Resources, therefore, are not being fully employed. Point F is impossible. Point F is out here, outside the PPF. Any point outside the curve is impossible to achieve with the current level of resources and technology. If we were to get more workers in, then we could possibly make point F in the future, or if we were to better train our workers, we could possibly get to point F. And it's not just labour, but it's all the other factors of production. We could have more or better capital, more or better enterprise, more or better land. As I said, if the factors of production changed in future, or technology improves, we might be able to get there very soon. The next concept we need to consider then is the PPF and its relationship with opportunity cost, or OC for shorthand. And this explains why the PPF has a negative slope. When all resources are employed and employed at their most efficient level, increasing the production of one good requires resources to be freed from producing another good. We have to take away some output, therefore, of farming, that last example, to give some extra output to fishing. We also need to remember our definition of opportunity cost, and opportunity cost is the benefit lost from the next best alternative foregone. So in order to make 100 units of fishing, for example, we consider perhaps the benefits that we've lost from not having any farming at all. In terms of production, the opportunity cost of increasing output of one good by 1 unit, so from going from maybe 50 fish to 51 fish, we have to consider what we've given up in terms of that farming output. How much farming output have we given up to make that extra gain in fishing? And we can show opportunity cost on the PPF. If we move from one point on the PPF to another, we can see how much output we forego of one good to make more of the other. If we go from point D to point C, the opportunity cost of 40 more units of fish, so there's plus 40 there, is 40 less units of farming. We forego 40 units of farming to gain 40 units of fishing. And then this brings us on to our next concept, the opportunity cost ratio, where the loss of output of one good in proportion to the gain of output in the other. In this case, we've lost 40 units of farming output, but we've gained 40 units of fishing, 40 to 40, i.e. 1 to 1 for this section of the PPF. If we go from B to D, the opportunity cost ratio is actually 1 to 5. We give up 10 units of farming, but we gain 50 units of fish. So that's 10 loss to 50 gain, 1 to 5. And if we go from C to A, the opportunity cost is actually 1 to 0.2, or 1 to 1/5. If we give up 50 units of farming at this point, we only gain 10 units of fish. 50 to 10, 5 to 1, 1 to 0.2. Cool. Now we have to consider what we can see from that last bit there is the opportunity cost ratio actually varied along our curve. Here it was 1 to 1, here it was 1 to 5, here it was 1 to 0.2. And we have to consider now why the opportunity cost varies along the PPF. Why does it have that concave shape? And the reason for this is that resources are not equally efficient at producing both types of goods and services, i.e. factor inputs are not perfectly substitutable. If you took someone who'd been fishing for 30 years and put them on a farm, they're not going to be as productive as someone who's already been working on the farm for 30 years and knows how to work as a farmer. And similarly, the same is true vice versa. You take that farmer and put him in a fishing boat, he won't have a Scooby what's going on compared to a fisherman who's been doing that for his day job for the last 30 years. And it's not just the people, it's also the capital. Fishing nets, for example, won't be very productive on farms. Combine harvesters won't be very productive in the middle of the ocean. Going from C to A, therefore at the top where the opportunity cost ratio we saw was 1 to 0.2, very high opportunity cost, 50 units of fish have to be given up for only 10 extra units of farming. No, sorry, that's the other way around. 50 units of farming are giving up for only 10 units of fish. Forgive me. As fishing, as not fishermen and not fishermen and fishing nets, but rather farmers and their capital, such as coal mine harvesters, are less productive working in the sea as they are on land. Cool. Forgive me for that slight error. Hopefully that makes sense still. We have what is known as diminishing marginal returns. That first worker from here we transfer from farming to fishing. He probably is a natural fisherman. Taking him across, we get quite a large gain for a small fall in farming output. Whereas here, where we're taking the skilled farmers and putting them into fishing, we have a much more reduced return from switching those workers across. Let's now consider what's meant by straight line PPF. So straight line PPF indicates perfect factor substitutability of resources, i.e. the opportunity cost is constant when we move between any combinations along the PPF. Any unit of a given resource is as productive as any other unit when used to produce a given good. E.g., the addition to output of cars and trucks, of adding more robotic arms to the production line is constant regardless of the arms already being used. For example, if you imagine a firm that makes both cars and trucks, if initially they're making only trucks, they might send one arm across to make cars. They'll lose 20 trucks, but they'll gain 30 cars. And if they send another arm across, it has that same output gain for cars, plus 30, but the same loss for trucks, minus 20. The OC ratio for straight line PPF, therefore, is constant at all levels of output. Imagine we're going up the PPF, we give away 20 units of trucks, but we gain 30 units of cars. We have a 1 to 1.5 ratio at all points along our PPF. 1 to 1.5 or 3 to 2. We now have to consider shifts of the PPF, i.e. how does the PPF expand and what does that mean? So potential economic growth is an increase in an economy's productive potential. The amount an economy can make has been increased. Production of both goods can now be increased without having to cut production of the other. And this looks like this on our diagrams. Here's our new PPF. We've shifted it outwards. And it can be caused by an increase in either the quality or the quantity of factors of production. We've either got more workers or better workers, more capital or better capital that can make more of both types of goods. Actual economic growth is a bit different. That's an increase in the actual value of the output of an economy. So imagine we were at A to start with. We can actually see actual economic growth from A to B, where we're increasing output of both capital and consumer goods, without having to see a shift in our PPF necessarily. If it were to go to maybe point C from B, that actual growth would also need an increase in potential economic output as well. We'd have to see potential economic growth and actual economic growth to get from B to C, whereas from A to B, that can happen with only actual economic growth. The PPF doesn't necessarily need to shift to go from A to B. And the causes of actual economic growth then, utilising more of the factors of production or using them more productively. I.e. at point A, we might have lots of unemployed labourers. We're going to hire more people for both making capital goods and consumer goods. We're going to go towards point B, towards our PPF. Negative actual economic growth is again, slight error from me there, a decrease in the actual value of output of an economy. If we're on this diagram here, we go from point B to point C here. That is negative actual economic growth. What we're actually making in terms of the number of capital goods and consumer goods has fallen. And this is caused by using fewer resources for production. or using them less productively. Negative potential economic growth, also known as hysteresis, is where we actually see a fall in our economy's productive potential. Say we go from C to point D, quite a large fall in our actual level of economic growth. If our economy is at point D for a very long period of time, lots of workers may lose their skills from being out of work for a long time, lots of capital may break down if it's not being used and cared for regularly. And what we might actually see is our PPF might begin to shift in. So even if we want to hire more workers in the long run, we can only get to maybe point E, which is lower than where we were at point C. Because we are now constrained by a lower PPF, our productive potential has shrunk. So the max production of both goods is decreased. We can now only get to point E, whereas before we were making it point C, which was not achievable in our new PPF. And this is caused by either a decrease in the quality or quantity of factors of production. And that's possibly again through being idle in an economic downturn. Cool. Let's also consider shifts in the PPF of one good. And this is where we have either a horizontal or vertical stretching of the PPF, and outward shift on one axis in the production possibility frontier. And this is caused by changes in production technology or increases in factor inputs that can be used on only one of the two goods. So imagine a brand new combine harvester is made that increases the output possible in farming. That would make our PPF look like this. So we still have that max level of fishing we can produce. Those extra combine harvesters those better combine harvesters rather, don't really add anything to extra fishing output. But we can now, for a given quantity of fish, before we could only make this much farming, but now we can make this much because there's better quality resources in one of the industries. After the shift in the PPF, more units of farming output can be produced for each level of output of fishing. We see a change in opportunity cost. Because the curve's got a bit flatter, the opportunity cost ratios have therefore changed. Let's now consider efficiency and the PPF. So productive efficiency is when each unit of output uses the fewest number of resources possible for that unit, i.e. we're making things as efficiently as possible with no extraneous waste. This occurs at every point on the PPF. So at point A, for example, even though we're only making fishing, we're using every resource possible in the economy and they're getting as much out of it in terms of fishing as possible. So even though we might have combine harvesters working in the sea, we're using them as efficiently as possible. That's what's happening there. So any point on this PPF is productively efficient. It's perhaps more obvious here where we have some combination of both. All our resources that are on the farm, all our resources that are being used to catch fish are working as hard as they can. There's no wastage from their output. Allocative efficiency is slightly different. Allocative efficiency is where production of those goods and services that are most desired by society in the quantity that they desire. So we're making as much as possible still, it's still productively efficient, but we're getting it in the quantity that's desired by society. So it's unlikely that either A, where we're only making fish, and B, where we're only making farming output, it's unlikely that those two are going to be allocatively efficient, albeit the fact they are productively efficient. Allocative efficiency, therefore, applies at only one point on the PPF because this is where total welfare is maximised. And this point will depend on the consumption preferences of the population. For a country like the UK, it's likely to be here at point G, where we like both fishing and farming. If there was a country where everyone was allergic to fish, then their allocatively efficient point would probably be much closer to B because no one's going to want any fishing output at all. So even though perhaps they're getting less sum total of fishing and farming, maybe at point B they're only getting 100 units of output, whereas maybe for the UK, if we're at point G, we might be getting something like 75. That's still, this point B would still be the allocatively efficient point for a country which doesn't have any desire to have any fish at all. Combinations of output inside the PPF are inefficient. They happen when there are unemployed resources or when resources are not used to their full potential. We could increase total output of goods and services by moving towards the PPF. So if we're at point E, moving towards C, towards D would be an improvement in efficiency. You can produce more of both goods with the same resources, represents an improvement in the welfare and a gain in allocative efficiency. We're assuming that people like to have as much as possible. Why would we only make point E? Why would that be good for welfare when we could make point C, point D, point G, or any other point in this range? That would definitely be an improvement in the welfare of a country. And combinations of goods such as good F are unattainable. They lie outside the PPF. A country needs an increase in their factor resources, an increase in their productivity, and or an improvement in their technology to achieve an outward shift of the PPF.